Yeah, we're reading from Incidents of the Life of a Slave Girl. This is a great book. The classic slave narratives, $7 is what I paid for it. Had it a while. It's a bargain. Um, I wanted to read these because we want to deal with the struggles of women, black women, and what they're going through and where it comes from in this society. Um, to this good grandmother, I was indebted for many comforts. My brother Willie and I often received portions of the crackers, cakes, and preserves she made to sell, and after we ceased to be children, we were indebted to her for many more important services. Such were the unusually fortunate circumstances of my early childhood. When I was 6 years old, my mother died, and then for the first time I learned by the talk around me that I was a slave. My mother's mistress was the daughter of my grandmother's mistress. She was the foster sister of my mother. They were both nourished at my grandmother's breast. In fact, my mother had been weaned at 3 months old that the babe of the mistress might obtain sufficient food. They played together as children, and when they became women, my mother was a most faithful servant to her whiter foster sister. On her deathbed, her mistress promised that her children should never suffer for anything, and during her lifetime she kept her word. They all spoke kindly of my dead mother, who had been a slave merely in name, but in nature was noble and womanly. I grieved for her, and my young mind was troubled with the thought who would now take care of me and my little brother. I was told that my home was now to be with her mistress, and I found it a happy one. No toilsome or disagreeable duties were imposed on me. My mistress was so kind to me that I was always glad to do her bidding, and proud to labor for her as much as my young years would permit. I would sit by her side for hours, sewing diligently with a heart as free from care as that of any free-born white child. When she thought I was tired, she would send me out to run and jump, and away I bounded, to gather berries or flowers to decorate her room. Those were happy days, too happy to last. The slave child had no thought of the morrow, but there came that blight which too surely waits on every human being born, or every human being born to be a chattel. First, they take food out of babies' mouths to feed white babies. That's the first thing you notice. And the second thing is how comfortable you can be in a slave position when you don't understand that that's what you are. When I was nearly 12 years old, my kind mistress sickened and died, and as I saw the cheek grow paler and the eye more glassy, how earnestly I prayed in my heart that she might live. I loved her, for she had been almost like a mother to me. My prayers were not answered. She died, and they buried her in a little churchyard, where day after day my tears fell upon her grave. A lot of death. Um, it reminds me of growing up in Brownsville when I did. A lot of death just around you. Um, I was sent to spend a week with my grandmother. I was now old enough to begin to think of the future, and again I asked myself what they would do with me. I felt sure I should never find another mistress so kind as the one who was gone. She had promised my dying mother that her children should never suffer for anything, and when I remembered that and recalled her many proofs of attachment to me, I could not help having some hopes that she had left me free. My friends were almost certain it would be so. They thought she would be sure to do it on account of my mother's love and faithful service. But alas, we all know that the memory of a faithful slave does not avail much to save her children from the auction block. And basically, black bodies were worth so much um, that, you know, you put them on the block because I might promise your parents something, but I got to think about my children. That's the way the slave master thinks. And if your children have to be enslaved to assure my children can eat. After a brief period of suspense, the will of my mistress was read, and we learned that she had bequeathed me to her sister's daughter, a child of 5 years old. So vanished our hopes. My mistress had taught me the precepts of God's word: Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Whatsoever ye would that men should do unto you, do ye even so unto them. But I was her slave, and I suppose that she did not recognize me as her neighbor. I would give much to blot out from my memory that one great wrong as a child. I loved my mistress, and looking back on the happy days I spent with her, I try to think with less bitterness of this act of injustice. While I was with her, she taught me to read and spell, and for this privilege, which so rare falls to the lot of a slave, I bless her memory. She possessed but few slaves, and at her death those were all distributed among her relatives. 5 of them were my grandmother's children, and had shared the same milk that nourished her mother's children. Notwithstanding my grandmother's long and faithful service to her owners, not one of her children escaped the auction block. These God breathing machines are no more in the sight of their masters than the cotton they plant or the horses they tend. And that's it. That's what you're worth. And that's what any worker is worth to bosses. You need to understand that. Um, and to those leftists who don't want to deal with race, use this to make your point. Because the slave master is the ultimate capitalist, and the slave is the ultimate worker. So you guys should be using slavery everywhere. It should be Marx and slavery. That should be it. If you're in the United States, that's all. That's all you need. And you can even use the slave trade to push socialism, democratic socialism, and you didn't even have to mention Marx, to be honest with you. So, slave narratives are very good, and we need them still, and we need to understand what's going on. We need to understand what this country was, is, how it's built, and as it's going into a new phase, what that means for us. Because, yeah, we're transitioning, but we still need to know what we're transitioning from so that we can go into something much better. Until next time, I thank you for your support. Take care of your mind, take care of your body, and be safe.